Good morning, church. I speak in front of people every day as my job, but they're 5 and 6-year-olds. You guys are a lot bigger. It's a little bit nerve-wracking. A couple of weeks ago, Diana used a little bit of our life as an example. And in reality, that was just a really tiny part of what God's detour has been in our lives. When Pastor Terry asked me to share with you today, I was excited and also a bit scared, to be honest. It's not easy to come up and make yourself vulnerable in front of your church families and probably some strangers here as well. However, I'm a planner and I couldn't just come up here and talk because I love to talk and I would end up talking for a long time, so I needed to write things down. So I sat at my laptop, and after about an hour, I had about 6 pages, single space, 12-point font, and I hadn't really gotten to the point yet because I started to realize that I've had many detours. But there's one particular one that pretty much changed my life, and I'm going to skip many events to get to that. And I'm going to apologize, but I'm going to do a lot of it as reading so I make sure that I get my point across because God has been absolutely amazing. In 2007, I found myself working as a first grade teacher for the Etiwanda School District. My principal at the time was one of those people that makes an impact in your life forever. She loved my teaching and thought that I was an exceptional teacher. And you probably can agree that it's kind of nice to work for someone who thinks that of you. She actually made me a better teacher. She had hired me because she was ready to make some changes in her school. And as you can imagine, I didn't really become a very popular teacher there because there was a lot of veteran teachers who had been doing the same thing for many, many years, and I was not very welcomed. The training that I had received prior to that, working at a very low socioeconomic school, was called Reading First. And I actually didn't know this for a really long time, but the teachers that were not my closest friends, they called me Reading First Larondo. Those of you who know me know that I have an absolute passion for teaching. Betty Rose was the name of my principal, and she saw this passion, and she made me love my job even more. She soon made me grade level leader and in charge of veteran teachers. Once again, not very well received. I could honestly say that everything in our home was pretty close to perfect. We were comfortable financially. Our boys, Ivan and Esteban, were healthy and doing well in school until one Sabbath morning. Nelson and I and the boys were sitting right where we usually sit, and Pastor Tom was preaching on being a lukewarm Christian. He said that being a lukewarm Christian could be considered worse than not being a Christian at all. As a lukewarm Christian, you know what you're supposed to do, but you're not doing it. And as a non-Christian, well, you're basically not held accountable for something you don't know you're not doing. Then he said, if you're not feeling challenged and experiencing events in your life that are bringing you to your knees, then you're probably a lukewarm Christian. I leaned over to Nelson and I whispered in his ear, I think we're lukewarm Christians. This sermon made such an impact on me. The thought of being a lukewarm Christian actually frightened me. You see, I was born and raised as a Seventh-day Adventist, as well as Nelson. As a matter of fact, if you read my journal, you would find Psalms 5:3 written several times. In the morning, O Lord, you hear my voice. In the morning, I lay my request before you and wait in expectation. My request for God had been so shallow and so superficial. I began to pray for a deep-seated relationship with God, one that could withstand any trial. And I wrote in my journal, Lord, whatever you have planned for me, I want to live that plan. I don't want to just get by comfortably, but I want my life to change someone. Well, I had no idea what God had in store for me. And to be honest, I was not prepared. In a few weeks, I found myself thinking about adding another child to our family. This was really unusual and something that I did not anticipate. Nelson and I had discussed several times, and 2 boys was our limit and our happy place. No one around me was really having children. I wasn't necessarily a young mom in the maternal sense, so I began to have private conversations with God about what was creating this desire, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't misreading any cues. I didn't really share this with anyone, not even Nelson. After a few months, I saw that this desire was not ceasing. As a matter of fact, it almost consumed my thoughts. I decided to tell Nelson and let him in on it. After all, I kind of needed his help to make it happen. We didn't talk about it much, but I knew that God was creating this desire. My work at the time was very challenging. I continued to be a grade level chair and was now teaching a combination class. So I was teaching first and second at the same time. After about a year of prayer, Nelson and I decided that having a baby was something that we would work on. We told one of our friends, and after 2 boys, we expressed a desire for having a girl. Our friend recommended this book that was 100% reliable and would guarantee us the gender that we wanted. We thought, well, what do we have to lose? So I read the book from cover to cover. I will spare you the fun details, but within a month, we had conceived. We were obviously very excited. We shared the news with our family and close friends, and we soon found ourselves in the doctor's office. I was about 20 weeks pregnant, and for those of you who are not familiar with that, that's about halfway through your pregnancy. We were in the waiting room, and Nelson was with me. The boys were there, and they were there so that they could hear the baby's heartbeat for the first time. I brought the book along because if the doctor was able to tell us the gender of the baby, I was ready to share this book and tell her to recommend it to her patients. Well, on February 9th, 2009, began the downward spiral of my life. I got called into the doctor's office to get my vitals checked before checking the baby. Once the doctor was ready to listen to the heartbeat, I don't know why, but I didn't tell her to go get my family. She laid me down, put the fetal heart monitor on my belly, and she began to move it around, trying to get a heartbeat. I told her how the baby had begun moving a few days ago, and she said that maybe the baby was facing a way that didn't allow for the heartbeat to be heard. Well, she probably failed to remember that this was my 3rd baby and that I knew that at 20 weeks, you should be able to hear a very strong heartbeat. She excused herself and said that she was going to go get an ultrasound machine in the room. As she walked out of the room, I began to panic. I began to say a prayer out loud, and I told God that this is not the challenge I was asking for. Please do not sacrifice this baby's life for my lukewarm relationship. The doctor walked in with the ultrasound machine, and as she rubbed the transducer across my belly, I could see the baby. It had a head, a body, arms, and legs, and although it looked like it was sleeping, the lack of a heartbeat made my greatest fear come true. Hold on, I have a tissue here somewhere. The doctor could not give me an immediate diagnosis until further testing was done. She called for Nelson and the boys to come into the room. They came in thinking they were going to hear the baby's heartbeat, but instead they found me sobbing uncontrollably. I told them there is no heartbeat. The boys hugged my knees. Nelson just sat down and did not say anything. I will spare you on the details of the horrific experience that I was put through in order to remove this lifeless body from me, because I know there's young children here today. But please believe me when I tell you that it was the most shameful, heartless, ungodly experience that any woman can endure. My school district gave me 2 weeks for bereavement, and in those 2 weeks, there was not a single moment that you didn't find me crying. I can honestly tell you that I cried every day for about 4 months. I just couldn't understand how God could create such a desire in me and then just literally have it ripped away from me. You see, in my study of the Bible, I had read that nothing happens to me without being okay by God first. How could God possibly think that I was prepared for this? After all, the Bible says he wants to fulfill the desires of my heart. Nelson and I tried to figure out why. What had I done? Why was the only question that filled my heart. My principal, Betty Rose, had been diagnosed with cancer and was now in remission. She had returned to work with her new wig, and she looked amazing. She was such a source of strength for me at this time. She understood that returning to work was very difficult. I cherish her. Well, as you can imagine, I couldn't attend church for a few weeks. When I finally did go to church, I was working in the children's department. It was after church was over. We were getting ready for an event, and I got a call from Nelson. And he told me that my friend from work had called to let me know that Betty Rose had passed away. Some of you were with me at that moment. I couldn't believe it. She was doing so well, it felt as though someone had told me that my own mother had died. I just don't understand, Lord. A couple of days after this announcement, I found myself in a meeting with a group of teachers. We were a group of experienced teachers that helped other teachers with specific students in addressing their needs. Well, as you can imagine, none of us could concentrate. We began talking about what happened with Betty. She was doing so well. We started crying and began sharing what she meant to us and the impact that she had in our lives. In the middle of this conversation, it was just a whole group of tables put together, and we just all kind of sit around, and our laptops are on, and we're usually very productive with our time. My friend Michelle says, Jeanette, I have to tell you something. I've been wanting to tell you, but I just couldn't find the right moment. I really think you need to know something. It was dead silent in that room, and she began to say, I just want you to know that when I knew what happened to your baby, I was devastated. When I visited you and you told me the horrific details of what had happened, I couldn't even believe that was possible. Then after 2 weeks, I saw you come back to work. You were composed back to yourself. You still treated your students like your very own. You were just as efficient as always and a great leader. You have never hidden from us that you're a Christian and that you love your church and that you're an active member. I knew in my heart that it was God who was giving you the strength, and the relationship that you had with him was making you be who you were. I wanted that. So a few weeks ago, I gave my heart to Christ. Because there is no way that someone could lose a baby, have it taken out of you so violently, and still be able to praise God. I now take my children to church, and I'm praying that one day my husband will join us. I wish I could say that that was the turning point. A lot of us go through life and things happen to us, and we never get a why answered. Well, that was my why. However, shortly after that loss, Nelson and I found out that we were pregnant again. I couldn't help but be less than thrilled because the sheer thought of another loss consumed my happiness. Sure enough, at about 9 weeks, I drove myself to the hospital on a Sunday morning as I was bleeding to find out that we had lost another baby. Nelson and I sat in our living room with Nelson's parents, who are devoted Christians, been SDAs their whole life. And we sat there and we looked at them and we said, there is no God. After all, I have never left the church. I have always been active in the youth, even as a teenager. And so has Nelson. How could he do this? Why did he do this? We were so perfectly happy. That next school year, I had an opportunity to take a buyout from my job. So basically, they would allow me to leave for 2 years and then come back, having lost my tenure and everything, but I would be able to come back. After Nelson saw the stress that I was under, and after lots of prayer, we decided to take a huge financial risk and have me stay home for 2 years. I felt that Betty Rose passing away was her giving me the okay to take a break. So on the last day of school, I had my classroom packed up and I had quit my job. The last day of school was May 24th, 2010. I was headed to the dentist for major cosmetic work. I had an hour before my appointment and decided to stop by a Target that was on the way. As I'm walking through the pharmacy aisles, I began to think, When was my last menstrual cycle? I honestly couldn't remember. I had not been feeling well, but I blamed all that on stress. Something in my heart told me to purchase a pregnancy test, so I did. I purchased it, then I walked into the Target bathroom, and I took the test. To my surprise, it was positive, and I had no one to tell but the next person on the stall. And I don't think she cared. I ran out of Target. I called my dentist, who happens to be Nelson's cousin, and I told her that I was not coming to her because I just had a positive pregnancy test and she was sworn to secrecy. I don't think I have to tell you how terrifying this was for me. You see, Nelson and I had pretty much given up on trying. I was determined on building my relationship with God. Now God was allowing this to happen again. I had made my prayer my priority. I have to say that I had a stronger relationship with God than with my own family. Not a day had gone by that I wasn't consciously in communication with God. As a stay-home mom, all I could think of now was this baby growing in me. There were moments of panic when I couldn't even breathe. One Saturday morning, right outside these doors, Margaret Baldwin, who I consider to be one of the strongest prayer warriors I know, asked me how I was doing. And many times we can just say, I couldn't hide my fears, and I began to cry right outside this sanctuary. And she said, don't deny God your fear. God knows it full well. It is in that moment of panic and fear that God is calling you to praise Him. He is going to do amazing things in your life. Let Him. So the next time you feel the storm in your heart and you can't catch your breath, I want you to drop to your knees and pray, and He will speak to you. Well, I know those words full well because I wrote them in my journal as soon as I got home. Well, I did just that. It wasn't very long. I was home alone. The boys were at school. Nelson was at work. And all of a sudden, I felt that horror that God was going to take another child from me. I literally cried out His name, and all the verses that I had been reading came to me. Weeping may remain for a night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. Psalms 35. This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory that God's Son may be glorified through it. John 11:4. Lord, I'm overcome by trouble and sorrow. Please, Lord, come to me and share with me what you want me to do. I can't take this anymore, and I'm nothing without you. The Lord will watch over your coming and your going, both now and forevermore. Now, friends, what happens next was the most beautiful, peaceful event in my life. In an instant, I experienced a peace that only God can give. It was immediate, and His voice was as loud and as clear as you're hearing mine. It was so clear that I wrote it down in my journal so I would never forget. On July 23rd, 2010, God said this, Jeanette, be still. You will deliver a healthy baby girl on January 18th, 2011. And when you see her face for the first time, you will know that I am your God. You might not understand the meaning of this until I tell you that I was only 12 weeks pregnant. At the time, I didn't know the gender of the baby, and my due date was for January 31st. I remembered I shared this with Lucy, and I told her, Lucy, if this truly comes true, I know what God's voice sounds like, and it's the most beautiful voice. Well, on January 18th, 2011, just like my journal said, I did deliver a perfect baby girl. Her name is Emmeline. She was healthy, and I did know that He was my God. In the background of all of this, Nelson and I were experiencing a financial crisis. Because it just can't be one thing, Lord, right? It has to be like everything. So we had completely changed our spending habits to match that of a one household income. However, we found ourselves barely making ends meet, and sometimes ends didn't meet and we were drowning. At the same time, we had family that was experiencing financial success, and it was so difficult for us to rejoice in their success when we were falling behind at a rapid speed. So once again, our turning point was here at church. I found myself listening to the pastor preach. His compelling message brought me to tears, and there was a phrase that will forever ring true in my heart. He challenged the church and he said, "You cannot outgive God." You see, we had fallen so far behind in our tithe as well. Nelson happened to be on call this particular Sabbath, so I couldn't lean over to him and whisper like I like to do. So instead, I texted him. I know, you're not supposed to do that, but I did. I asked him, just random, he's probably with a patient doing some, and here I text him, how much would we have to give to catch up in tithe? Question mark, smiley face. He texted me back with an amount. Well, when the offering plate came by, I had written a check for that amount. It literally left $100 in our main bank account. When I told Nelson later that evening, I really was expecting him to get upset. He wasn't here. He didn't see my walk through. He simply said, okay. You see, Nelson knows that I wouldn't do such a drastic thing unless I had been moved by the Holy Spirit to do so. So we waited. Well, that week was one of our worst financially demanding weeks. And in my weakness, I asked God, Lord, what happened? When I talked to Nelson and expressed my frustration, he said, what were you expecting, Jeanette? An extra $1,000 in our bank account? Well, yeah, actually, I was expecting that. And he responded, it is out of our control. We will continue faithful. It is out of our hands. Well, a few weeks later, we found out, to our shocking and unexpected surprise, that we were expecting baby number 4. You know that 1% margin of error? Yeah. This was actually the opposite of financial stability, Lord. So 2.5 years ago, we welcomed Natalia to our family. So here is our detour. He never did give me that extra cash I was expecting. But what he has given me is this. And what I tell you next is not because I'm bragging or I have anything in me that has caused me to have what I have. It is all because God's grace. And because I told him, if you get me through many of these events, I will make sure that I glorify your name. So, financially, we're back on our feet. We still have our beautiful home that we could have lost. We have my 11-year-old Suburban that has never in 11 years needed a single repair. We have never even had to change the brakes on that truck. Now, this is even more miraculous when you figure that we use it to tow our trailer. I don't think I can get rid of that truck. It has too many memories. Besides, there's nothing big enough to fit my family of 6 besides a bus. As far as my career, I am now at a school 3 minutes away from home. The boys' school is 3 minutes away from my work. I'm able to pick up Emmeline every day after half-day TK. I have lunch with her and take her to Leanne, who's the amazing lady that watches my girls for me. I'm grade level leader for our kindergarten team once again. I have parents coming to me and asking me how they can make sure that their child gets me as their teacher next year. In 2017-2018, we will lose about half of our school population to an opening of a new school. Parents who I've never met before are already asking to stay at our school until their child finishes kindergarten with me. That's a nice reward for sacrificing time with my family. I have the opportunity to impact lives every day. I have a new principal who sends new parents to my class to see how our kindergartners are taught. The district office sends newly hired teachers to my classroom to see how I run my classroom efficiently. And as a mom, I have 4 children. I have this that I don't think Ivan knows I kept. In one of my darkest days, which apparently was October 12th, 2012, he probably saw me at my lowest point, and he left this note on my pillow. It says, "Number 1, Mom, that will never change. Turn over. Hope you feel better. Signed, Ivan." Ivan is a freshman in high school who made the JV swim team and manages to keep straight A's in all of his honors classes. He is ranked 14th out of 949 students. And he still finds time to play with his sisters even after finishing hours of homework. And before he even does anything that he likes to do, he always asks me, "Is there anything you need?" I have Esteban, who got a 4.0 last trimester. He read his entire chapter of science on his own and took his own notes when he wasn't happy with the score he got on his tests. And just last week, he told me, "Thank you for making me me." And those 2 babies I lost, well, I got them back. I didn't get them back in my time. I didn't get them because of a book. I got them in his time because of his grace. My 2 beautiful girls, Emmeline and Natalia, remind me about the simple things in life. They are to sing together, play together, to laugh, and to cry. And even though Natalia tests my patience every day, maybe every hour, she has completed our family. And through it all, I have my husband, Nelson, who, although I am not the easiest person to live with at times, I know, he makes everyone's lunch every day. He fixes everything that is broken in our house. And he makes me take a day off from work every now and then so we can have a date. My life isn't perfect. I still fall to my knees for many reasons. But I'm grateful for that, because those imperfections are what keeps me on my knees. God has an alternative answer to your prayers. I guarantee it. Let go and let God. His alternative plan is much better than